Jessica Chobot didn't disappear from Expedition X with an announcement or a goodbye. One season she was there, steady, fearless, asking the questions viewers trusted. Then suddenly, she was gone. No explanation, no farewell episode, just silence. Officially, it was a creative shift, but people who worked behind the scenes say that story doesn't come close to the truth, because Jessica wasn't just a host. She was the one slowing things down when the danger escalated. The one questioning edits that didn't match what really happened in the field, and the one who reportedly pushed back when investigations crossed a line from discovery into risk for spectacle. Tonight, we're unpacking what led to her quiet exit, the investigation that changed everything, and why some footage may never be seen. If you value stories that go deeper than the surface narrative, hit subscribe now, because what happened here wasn't just a departure, it was a warning. Before her departure became a quiet mystery, Jessica Chobot was the emotional and intellectual anchor of Expedition X. She wasn't just a host reacting to strange locations or unexplained events. She was the connective tissue between the investigation and the audience. While others focused on instruments and theories, Jessica focused on context, human impact, and what the evidence actually meant. That balance is what made viewers trust her. From the earliest episodes, crew members noticed something different about how she worked. When cameras stopped rolling, she didn't disappear to reset for the next scene. She stayed. She reviewed audio logs, rewatched thermal footage, and asked for raw data instead of highlight reels. According to multiple people who worked in production, Jessica was the only on-camera talent who regularly requested access to uncut material after investigations wrapped. Not because she wanted more screen time, but because she wanted to understand what really happened. Her background mattered here. Jessica came into Expedition X with years of experience in investigative media, not just paranormal entertainment. She understood how easily a narrative could drift away from facts once editing began. That awareness made her cautious in ways others weren't. She often questioned whether a reaction shot truly reflected the moment it was attached to, or whether an equipment malfunction was being framed too mysteriously for what it actually was. This didn't make her difficult. It made her precise. Crew members have said she rarely raised her voice or caused confrontation. Instead, she asked quiet, uncomfortable questions. Why did this cut remove the evacuation discussion? Why wasn't this safety concern mentioned on camera? Why does this moment feel bigger in the edit than it felt in real time? As the show gained popularity, those questions became more frequent and more inconvenient. Jessica believed the strength of Expedition X wasn't fear, but credibility. She wanted the audience to feel uncertainty without manipulation, tension without exaggeration. That philosophy shaped her on-screen presence. Calm, grounded, observant. She didn't need to dramatize the unknown. She respected it. But that same commitment began to place her at odds with the direction the show was quietly moving toward. Because as ratings grew, so did the pressure to escalate. And Jessica was standing directly in the way of that escalation. What started as dedication would soon be viewed as resistance. And that resistance, whether she realized it or not, was already putting her on the outside. As Expedition X grew in popularity, the tone of the series began to shift in subtle but important ways. What had started as a careful investigation-first program slowly leaned toward faster pacing, higher stakes, and moments designed to feel more intense on screen. To most viewers, the change was almost invisible, but behind the scenes, it was impossible to miss. Production meetings increasingly focused on energy, impact, and payoff. Episodes needed stronger hooks and more dramatic beats to compete in a crowded paranormal television landscape. According to multiple crew accounts, she was one of the first to question whether the show was drifting away from its original purpose. She didn't object to tension or suspense. What bothered her was when the narrative began to move faster than the evidence. In meetings, she reportedly asked whether certain moments were being emphasized because they were meaningful or because they played better on camera. Those questions didn't always land well. Jessica noticed that reaction shots were sometimes prioritized over analysis, and that equipment anomalies were framed more ominously in post-production than they felt in the field. Nothing was fabricated outright, but the tone was being sharpened. Uncertainty was being nudged toward implication. She pushed back quietly at first, asking for context to be added, requesting that disclaimers stay in place, suggesting that viewers deserved to know when something was unresolved rather than hinted at as definitive. To her, ambiguity wasn't a weakness, it was honesty. Field operations changed too. Investigations were occasionally extended longer than planned, not because new data was coming in, but because the episode still needed a climax. Crew members later said Jessica was often the one checking safety protocols repeatedly, confirming exit plans, and questioning why they were staying when conditions were deteriorating. One technician recalled her asking a simple question during a late-night shoot: "If nothing else happens tonight, are we okay with that?" The silence that followed told her everything. Behind the scenes, her insistence on restraint began to stand out. She wasn't refusing to investigate. She was refusing to exaggerate. And in a production environment increasingly shaped by ratings pressure, that distinction mattered. What once made Jessica invaluable, her commitment to accuracy and caution, was slowly being reframed as hesitation, as friction, as someone not fully aligned with where the show was heading. And that tension would soon stop being theoretical, because one investigation would force everything into the open and make it impossible for her to keep going as if nothing had changed. According to multiple people close to production, the moment everything changed for Jessica Chobot happened during an investigation that never aired in its original form. On paper, it was a standard assignment. A remote site with reports of unexplained activity, environmental instability, and electromagnetic interference. The kind of location Expedition X had handled before. But this time, the risks weren't theoretical. From the start, Jessica expressed concerns about the environment itself. Structural instability, unreliable communications, and a lack of clear emergency access made the location unusually dangerous. She flagged the site as high risk and requested additional safeguards before filming continued. Those requests were acknowledged and then quietly deprioritized. The pressure to proceed came down to one thing. The episode needed something to happen. As the team moved deeper into the investigation, equipment began behaving erratically. Readings spiked without explanation. Audio feeds dropped in and out. Crew members later described sudden dizziness, disorientation, and a strange sensation of pressure that none of them could easily explain. While these moments were unsettling, what disturbed Jessica most was how quickly they were reframed as atmosphere rather than warning signs. At one point, a piece of equipment failed in a way that caused a brief but serious safety incident. No one was badly hurt, but it was close enough to leave an impression. Jessica was reportedly the first to call for a pause, insisting they stop and assess before continuing. Cameras were still rolling. Later that night, she reviewed the raw footage alone. What she saw didn't match how the incident was being discussed. Thermal anomalies appeared in the same moments the equipment failed. Audio distortions coincided with physical effects on the crew. Whether it was environmental, technical, or something unknown didn't matter. What mattered was that it wasn't being treated with the seriousness it deserved. The next morning, Jessica confronted production leadership. She didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing. She asked a direct question instead. Were they documenting what happened or reshaping it into something more dramatic than truthful? The response, according to insiders, was carefully neutral. The episode would be edited responsibly. Safety would be addressed internally. The narrative would be adjusted. That answer didn't reassure her. It confirmed her fear. For the first time, Jessica realized the issue wasn't a single investigation. It was the system deciding which parts of reality were convenient enough to show. And in that moment, she understood something else too. If she stayed, she would eventually be asked to stand in front of the camera and support a version of events she didn't believe in. And that was a line she wasn't willing to cross. After the investigation that raised serious alarms for Jessica Chobot, she expected a period of reflection, a review of what went wrong, how close the crew had come to real danger, and whether the episode should even move forward. Instead, what followed was something far more unsettling. When the first rough cuts began circulating, Jessica noticed immediately that key moments were missing. The pauses she had called for, the discussions about evacuation, the uncertainty in the data, all of it had been trimmed or reframed. What remained was a cleaner, more dramatic version of events, one that suggested tension without fully acknowledging risk. According to one post-production staffer, entire segments where Jessica questioned whether they should continue filming were marked as non-essential. Audio clips documenting crew discomfort were shortened. The equipment failure was labeled as a minor malfunction rather than a warning sign. The episode still worked as television, but it no longer worked as truth. Jessica didn't confront anyone emotionally. She went to the editing room and asked for the cut logs. When she reviewed them, she noticed something disturbing. Certain clips had been flagged for removal before the full debrief even took place. That meant decisions about what not to show were being made before the investigation had been properly analyzed. She raised this in a production call, asking why moments related to safety and uncertainty were being softened. The answer she received was careful, corporate, and revealing. Those elements were too alarming for the tone of the series. They could create unnecessary fear or imply liability. To Jessica, that reasoning missed the point entirely. If something was alarming, it deserved context, not concealment. If an investigation pushed people into danger, viewers had a right to know. Her analytical segments were shortened. More narration was shifted elsewhere. On screen, nothing appeared wrong. Off screen, she felt herself being managed. Crew members noticed it too. One assistant editor later later said it felt like Jessica was being protected from herself, shielded from having too much influence over the final story. Not because she was wrong, but because she was inconvenient. This wasn't censorship in the obvious sense. It was filtration. Reality passed through a lens designed to preserve tone rather than truth. For Jessica, that realization was heavier than fear of the unknown. She could accept unanswered questions. What she couldn't accept was pretending certainty where none existed, or glossing over risk for the sake of a cleaner episode. And once she saw how easily reality could be reshaped in post-production, she knew the problem wasn't going to fix itself. The show wasn't just documenting the unexplained anymore. It was managing it. That understanding quietly pushed her closer to a decision she hadn't yet spoken out loud, but was already forming. In the weeks following the disputed edit, Jessica Chobot's concerns shifted from storytelling to something more serious: crew safety. What had once felt like occasional risk began to look like a pattern: longer shoots in unstable locations, fewer buffers built into filming schedules, decisions increasingly justified by how well a moment might land with the audience. Jessica started asking different questions, not about ratings or pacing, but about response times, about backup plans, about what would happen if someone got hurt in a place emergency services couldn't reach quickly. According to a crew medic, she once asked bluntly how many minutes it would take to extract an injured team member from a remote site if something collapsed. When she heard the answer, she reportedly fell silent. Production leadership didn't ignore her outright, but her concerns were framed as caution bordering on overreaction. After all, nothing catastrophic had happened yet. The show had always pushed into difficult environments. That was part of its identity. Jessica disagreed. She believed that survival so far didn't justify increasing risk. During planning sessions for future investigations, she began flagging sites as unacceptable unless additional safeguards were added: extra personnel, redundant communications, more conservative access limits. These requests were often met with budget constraints and time pressure. The message was clear, even if it was never stated directly. The show needed to stay agile. One meeting in particular stuck with her. A producer reportedly described a high-risk location as worth it if something finally breaks open. Jessica responded quietly, asking whether something breaking open included people. The room went still. After that, her role subtly changed. She was still respected, still on camera, but increasingly excluded from early planning conversations. Decisions were being made before she entered the room. By the time she raised concerns, the logistics were already locked in. Crew members later said it felt like two priorities were colliding. One side focused on discovery and responsibility, the other focused on momentum. What made this moment critical was that Jessica wasn't asking to stop investigating. She was asking to slow down when the line between exploration and danger blurred. To her, the unknown deserved respect, not pressure. Privately, she began confiding in a small number of colleagues that she felt the show was approaching a breaking point, not because of what they might find, but because of how far they were willing to go looking for it. That tension wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, professional, controlled, and that's what made it so dangerous. Because once safety becomes negotiable, the decision to step away stops being emotional. It becomes inevitable. The moment Jessica Chobot realized she couldn't continue didn't happen during a dramatic confrontation or a dangerous incident in the field. It happened in a conference room. During a routine production briefing for an upcoming investigation, logistics were being finalized for a remote location with known structural instability. Jessica had already reviewed the latest environmental assessments and flagged the area as high risk. She recommended additional personnel and stricter limits on how far the team should go once inside. The response she received wasn't hostile. It was procedural. The budget wouldn't allow it. The schedule couldn't support delays. The team would adapt as needed. Then someone said it. The investigation needed proximity. The episode needed stakes. Jessica didn't argue. She listened, and in that moment, she understood that the calculation had shifted. Risk was no longer something to be minimized. It was something being weighed against entertainment value. Later that evening, she returned to her hotel and began organizing her notes. Not dramatically, methodically. Field journals, emails, planning documents. She drafted a message requesting a pause in filming until safety standards and narrative boundaries could be reviewed. When the response came back, it was polite and firm. The show was moving forward. That was enough. Jessica didn't walk away out of fear or frustration. She walked away because staying would mean accepting a system where caution was treated as an obstacle. She wasn't willing to be the face of something she couldn't stand behind. 2 days later, she made the call. She would would step back from filming. No public conflict, no accusations, just a line drawn quietly and permanently. And with that decision, Expedition X lost more than a host. It lost the person who had been asking whether the mission was still worth the cost. Jessica Chobot's departure didn't create chaos overnight. It created silence. On the surface, Expedition X continued. Episodes aired, investigations moved forward. Viewers were told it was a normal transition. But behind the scenes, crew members say the atmosphere shifted immediately. Meetings grew shorter. Safety discussions became streamlined instead of thorough. Decisions that once involved debate now moved quickly, often without pushback. Several longtime staff noticed that the questions Jessica used to ask were no longer being asked at all. Why are we pushing deeper? What happens if this goes wrong? Are we documenting something real or framing something dramatic? Without her in the room, those pauses disappeared. Not because the answers had improved, but because no one was pressing for them anymore. Editors later admitted that the tone of episodes subtly changed. More emphasis on reactions, less on uncertainty. Moments that would have once been framed as inconclusive were now allowed to sit closer to implication. Nothing fabricated, just a shift in balance. One crew member described it this way: "Before, we were investigating first and filming second. After she left, we were filming first and justifying it later." Jessica didn't publicly criticize the show. She didn't hint at wrongdoing. But people noticed that when asked about Expedition X in interviews, she spoke carefully. She praised the team, she respected the work, but she never spoke about the investigations the way she once had. Privately, she stayed in touch with certain crew members. When asked if she regretted leaving, her answer was always the same. "I miss the mission," she said. "I don't miss what it was becoming." Her absence didn't expose a scandal. It revealed a vacuum, and in that vacuum, the show kept going, just without the voice that had been slowing it down before it crossed the line. After stepping away, Jessica Chobot never released a tell-all. There was no expose, no podcast tour, no dramatic reveal, but people close to her say the most important things she discovered were never meant to become public footage anyway. During her final seasons, Jessica began privately documenting moments that didn't make it into episodes, not because they were unbelievable, but because they were uncomfortable. Times when the data didn't match the narrative, when equipment failures were ordinary, but later framed as something more, when fear was amplified not by the unknown, but by editing choices. She believes some mysteries lose meaning the moment they're pushed too hard. One former field researcher said Jessica kept a separate notebook during investigations, not for theories, but for boundary, places where she felt continuing would cross from exploration into provocation. She rarely spoke about it openly, but she made quiet notes when she felt the team was pressing an environment too aggressively, or when local warnings were treated as atmosphere rather than information. There was one investigation she reportedly refused to reshoot segments for, not because something terrifying happened, but because nothing happened at all. The readings were flat, the environment was stable, and she felt recreating tension would be dishonest. That footage was eventually reshaped without her involvement. That moment stuck with her. Jessica wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was wary of certainty, of pretending to understand things that might never offer clean answers. To her, the real danger wasn't what lurked in the dark. It was what happens when curiosity becomes entitlement. After leaving, she told a colleague something that never aired anywhere. Some places don't need to be solved. They need to be respected. What she refused to put on camera wasn't evidence. It was the moment when exploration turns into intrusion. And once she felt that line had blurred, she knew stepping away was the only honest choice left. Jessica Chobot didn't leave Expedition X with accusations or controversy. She left with restraint, and that restraint is exactly why her departure still echoes through the show today. In an industry driven by escalation, walking away quietly is often more disruptive than making noise. Jessica didn't expose secrets. She didn't leak footage. She simply removed herself from a process she no longer believed could stay honest. That choice forced an uncomfortable question, not just for the show, but for the entire genre. How far should investigation go before it stops being investigation? Since her exit, paranormal television has continued to grow louder, faster, and more extreme, higher stake, bigger claim, less patience for uncertainty. In that environment, Jessica's absence feels deliberate, almost instructional. She showed that credibility isn't built by chasing answers at any cost. It's built by knowing when to stop asking. Crew members who worked with her still reference the Jessica check, a phrase used informally when discussing risk or narrative framing. It means asking whether a moment is being shown because it matters, or because it plays well on screen. Even now, her influence lingers in the margins. Jessica never said the show crossed a dangerous line, but she didn't have to. Her decision did the talking. When viewers ask why she left, the answer isn't hidden footage or paranormal terror. It's something far more unsettling. She saw where the road was heading, and she chose not to walk it. That's why her exit wasn't an ending. It was a warning. And the fact that it was delivered in silence may be the most honest thing she ever did on camera.